because one, he had purchased an abandoned schoolhouse, and he had made that into the first permanent church structure in the Eagle area. Later on, he was also known to, after he retired from being a minister, he went on to be one of the first trustees of the current Eagle, was known as the Episcopal Methodist Church at the time. Now it's the Eagle United Methodist Church. When he first came into the area, he ministered to people by preaching and ministering in homes, in the surrounding schools. He'd minister in workshops from the carpenters, from blacksmith shops, and even from various barns that he was able to preach in. The life of the circuit rider, which is what I portray, was not necessarily an easy life. For the average circuit rider, they seldom made it to the age of 40. So I would be older than your average circuit rider. It was tough on them. It was a hard life. They would have areas that, for example, there was a Father Kundig. He was the circuit riding padre who started Eagle's very own St. Teresa's. And his circuit went from Milwaukee all the way out to Madison and all points in between. Father Kundig was well known for starting as many as 200 different parishes in this area. In fact, he was also one of the motivating individuals who started this cemetery right here. For the United Methodist Church, some of the different circuit riders that were in this area, their circuit would range from Palmyra to North Prairie to Eagle to Troy Center and East Troy. Other pastors, their ministries and circuits went as far as Lake Geneva and Burlington. Well, while they were on the road, they suffered many hardships. For example, Father Kundig, he had an experience where he was just leaving Watertown and he was riding on his faithful steed. And it was in January, and he came across a large mud puddle. And as they were trying to forge through it very carefully, the horse lost its footing and slipped in up to its belly. And then it rolled over on its side, trapping Father Kundig's leg underneath. Now, there was no one around to help him. So for a good part of 2 hours, he just prayed because he knew if that horse started to struggle, he'd either be killed or he'd be seriously injured. So after praying, he started to slowly work his leg out from underneath the horse. And after a total of about 3 hours, according to the material I've read, he was able to work himself out from underneath the horse, take the horse by the reins, bring it on dry land, and keep going. Other challenges that circuit riders had in this area was they struggled with wild bears. They had wolves they contended with. There's a story where there was Father Kundig was staying in, I believe it was an abandoned cabin, and the wolves were on the outside trying to get in, and there were holes that were big enough to put your hand through. So there wasn't much keeping him between the wolves and the safety of the inside of the cabin. As we spent the night out in the open, there was more times than not, we would be sleeping underneath trees. We'd maybe make a lean-to that we'd stay on, and we'd be struggling with not only mosquitoes, but also sand fleas, ticks, and biting flies. It wasn't an easy life. Most people are asking me, well, if you're a circuit rider, where's your horse? Well, if you were lucky, you had a horse. There were many other circuit riders that they went by ox cart, they went by hand cart. Many times they hoofed it themselves. And occasionally, if they were really lucky, they got to ride on a horse and buggy. Oftentimes, if you did have a horse and buggy and you were out and you were traveling from one point to another, and if you got caught in a storm or a blizzard, what they do is they disconnect the horse from the wagon. They tip the wagon over, and the circuit rider would fall underneath for protection and send the horse off to its next point. Because the horses got to know where they were going. And then if at the congregation, if your pastor's horse showed up without the pastor, you knew there was a problem. And so you went out and looked for him. So that was one of the ways that the congregations would look after their pastor. Another way is that the only way that the pastors would eat would usually be from the generosity of the congregations. And back in the 1860s, 1880s, a lot of the congregations weren't that rich. They didn't have much money. So oftentimes eating was sparse for the circuit rider. And it wasn't uncommon for a circuit rider to go maybe 2 or 3 days without eating. When he would come straight off the road, he'd have his saddlebag, which would be filled with his vestments, with his equipment for doing the sacraments. And he would usually come into town and almost right away start doing ministry, do a prayer service or doing vesters or maybe even doing a worship service. For the circuit rider, there was both very sad parts of his ministry and happy times. If you'd come with me, I want to show you a gravestone over here. Back in the 1800s, people didn't have a long life expectancy, essentially to tell with where the Paradise Springs is. Mm-hmm. And across the street, there's that little log cabin. Well, Celia was born and grew up in, for 2 years, she lived in that cabin, and she experienced a spell. And as her mother picked her up and tried to carry her into town, she passed away. And that wasn't uncommon because it was a challenge for any child to be making it past the age of 12 back in the 1800s. So I'm going to encourage you to look through the cemetery. And as you do, take a look at the dates. There's a lot of people that died under the age of 40. A lot of children that are in there. Any questions? Some of the questions people have asked me was, when was the last time that the cemetery had someone buried? And I was told in the 1850s. I mean, the 1950s. You're going to find a lot of fascinating tombstones. You're going to see them like there's one over there and another one here where it's made out of rocks and pebbles. And there was a gentleman that was referred to in town as Captain. And one of the things that he enjoyed doing was making the headstones out of small rocks and pebbles. You'll also notice that we do have some markers that are actually made out of wood too. So I encourage you to walk around and take a look. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
I don't know about the large cross.
That I don't know. I have been told that there is a pamphlet or booklet that was made up on the history of this cemetery and all of the other cemeteries that are on this tour. So when you get back to the start point where I think you're going to have refreshments available, you might want to ask one of the tour guides about that.